August 18th, 2024, just after midnight. In a quiet Northampton park, a man is surrounded in the dark, and within moments, a brutal attack leaves him fighting for his life. By the time help arrives, the scene is so violent that officers know instantly this was no random confrontation. And years earlier, on 4th July 2020, children were playing only meters away when sudden gunfire rips through the estate. Witnesses watch in shock as a young man collapses with close-range target killing. What unfolded that day wasn't a feud or a warning. It was a deadly mistake. This is the story of Tommy Boom and Imani Alloway-Muir, and two killings so sudden and ruthless that even seasoned detectives struggled to comprehend the brutality behind them. Welcome to UK Crime Documentaries. Let's get straight into the case. Tommy Boom's life looked very different. He had grown up in Canning Town, surrounded by a tight East London family network that shaped most of his early years. When he was 10, everything shifted. The family moved to Northampton. His relatives described how he came out of his shell as he got older. Fitness became his anchor. He spent hours at the gym, lifting, running, and pushing himself. At home, he cooked with the same energy. His family joked that he never stopped raiding the fridge. The deepest connection in his life was with his daughter. Every decision, his family said, seemed to bend toward her future. The grief that followed his death was sharpened by one reality. She would grow up without the memories he had imagined giving her. But the picture was not perfect. Court records later confirmed he had been involved in drug dealing and had breached a suspended sentence. It was part of his history, one his family acknowledged but never allowed to define him. Because while Tommy was moving through his own struggles and routines, two young men on the opposite side of Northampton were moving toward him long before they ever met. Long before the confrontation in the park, two other young men were building a very different world for themselves. Both 21, both living in Woodside Way, Northampton, Keenan Larman and Bradley Okocha-Slight, were running a small but steady drug line from Paget House. Investigators would later find a phone linked to their operation, a contact list of 80 to 90 users, a quiet record of the trade they controlled. Each had a defined role. Okocha-Slight managed the drug phone and handled the exchanges, taking orders and supplying users. Larman acted as the lookout and enforcer, standing ahead of the deals to control the space and deter anyone who might interfere. Larman's path into this life began in 2020. Until then, he had been focused on a football academy course, drifting through the routines of training and study. But when the pandemic hit, the course was cut short, and the structure he relied upon vanished. Then, in desperation, cannabis dealing came first, and the cash grew. The risks grew with it, and soon he was supplying heroin and crack cocaine because, as he later told the court, the earnings were simply too high to walk away from. But the trade brought danger too. Larman carried a knife almost constantly, saying it was for protection, as, according to his words, his peers were being stabbed regularly, so he believed he had no choice. One incident in particular altered him, a setup that ended with him being stabbed twice in the arm. And soon their separate worlds would collide, triggered not by chance but by a debt, a phone call, and a plan set in motion under cover of darkness. Earlier that night, a homeless woman who regularly bought drugs from Larman and Okocha-Slight made a call to their line. She owed them £40, but this time she said she wanted to repay the debt and buy £100 worth of drugs on top of it. What the pair didn't know, and what emerged later in court, was that she and Tommy Boom had already agreed on a plan. Her call wasn't about settling money or buying more. It was a setup. She would lure the two dealers to the park, and Tommy would rob them. At 11:30 p.m., Larman and Okocha-Slight left Paget House, moving through the streets of Northampton, looking for more users to add to their growing contact list. They expected to make money that night, nothing more. Larman, as he did every day, carried a large hunting knife hidden in his waistband. When they stepped into Miller's meadow, the darkness swallowed them. Lahman would describe that moment in detail to the jury, how he couldn't see clearly, how the shapes around him blended into the night. And then, from the shadows behind them, someone moved. What began as a simple meeting in the park was already shifting into something far more volatile, and the next moments would decide everything. When the two dealers reached the bench, the exchange should have lasted seconds. Instead, it stalled. The homeless woman kept her hands in her pockets, avoided eye contact, and offered no money. She didn't smoke, didn't relax, didn't behave as she usually did when meeting them. Okocha Slight stayed seated beside her while Lahman stood in front, watching her shift uneasily in the dark. Every delayed moment made the air heavier. Then the silence broke. From the bushes behind them, two figures surged forward. One of them was Tommy Boone. The other, known in court only by the nickname Amazon, who stayed just behind him. The confrontation was immediate. Tommy stepped into Lahman's path, demanding to know what they were doing. The words were sharp. In that instant, whatever tension had been building turned into something unmistakably dangerous. Lahman told the court he immediately panicked when Tommy appeared, believing he was about to be robbed. He said he had heard multiple accounts of Tommy robbing drug dealers and thought this was another setup. He told Tommy to back off, but Tommy didn't move. Court evidence established something crucial. Tommy was unarmed. When emergency services arrived later, they recovered no weapon from him, nothing on the ground or hidden nearby. Despite this, Lahman claimed he thought Tommy had a knife tucked out of sight, even though he hadn't seen one. He also said Amazon stepped closer and asked to slap, a phrase Lahman interpreted as a reference to firing a gun. And then, in seconds, the tension that had built in the darkness turned into irreversible violence, leaving no time for anyone to react. What happened next unfolded in moments, fast enough that witnesses later struggled to piece it together. As the confrontation sharpened, Tommy stepped closer, closing the gap between them. Lahman told the court he tried to break away, turning to run left, away from both Tommy and Amazon. But before he could put distance between them, Tommy caught hold of his arm. That contact became the turning point. In Lahman's account, it felt like a repeat of a past attack where he had been held down and stabbed. Whether that fear was real or imagined, the jury later heard, is what defined the split second that followed. Lahman reached into his waistband, took out the hunting knife he carried, and swung it while trying to get free from Tommy's grip. He stabbed Tommy twice. One sliced into Tommy's right arm. The second drove into the side of his chest. It was this wound the post-mortem confirmed as fatal, a single stab deep enough to collapse him where he stood. Emergency services arrived quickly. Blue lights cut through the darkness, paramedics working on Tommy on the footpath where he fell. But despite every effort, he was pronounced dead at the scene shortly after midnight. Police tape went up almost instantly, sealing off the entrances, closing the path, and marking out a crime scene that stretched across the quiet park. Forensic officers moved in under portable lights, documenting every footprint, every droplet of blood, every trace of the violence that had happened in seconds but would shape the rest of the investigation. But the aftermath would take the case in an even more disturbing direction, not just in what happened, but in what was recorded afterwards. The moment Tommy collapsed, Lahman broke away first, running out of Miller's meadow with Okocha Slight close behind him. Behind them, Amazon gave chase for a short distance, shouting as they fled into the streets beyond the trees. But within moments the pursuit faded and the two men disappeared into the darkness. What followed in the hours after the killing became a defining part of the prosecution case. Instead of panic or silence, there was filming. Shortly after leaving the park, Lahman and Okocha Slight recorded a video of the murder weapon, still smeared with Tommy's blood, captions reading as "just had to juice a guy up." It was sent to an associate, not as an explanation, but almost as a statement. A second video followed, a blood-stained trainer, punctuated by 3 laughing emojis. The tone was unmistakable, and it would later undermine any claim of fear or regret. But what followed was even more grim. At 8:40 a.m., while the police and forensic teams were examining the taped-off crime scene, Lahman filmed himself walking past the area. The footage showed him recording the location where the stabbing had taken place earlier that night. He didn't stay in Northampton for long. Shortly after filming the scene, he boarded a train to the Birmingham area, leaving the town behind before officers had even confirmed a list of suspects. By morning, the scene was sealed, the suspects were gone, and detectives were racing against time to piece together the truth. In the first hours after Tommy Boom's death, Northamptonshire police treated Miller's Meadow as a rapidly developing major incident. The crime scene stretched across the grass and into the residential streets nearby, and with limited information in those early moments, detectives cast the net wide. Detectives launched a public appeal, opening an online portal where residents could upload CCTV, mobile footage, or information anonymously. It was a modern, community-driven approach to a case that relied heavily on piecing together movements minute by minute. By midday on Thursday, 4 people had been taken into custody: an 18-year-old man and 3 women aged 40, 38, and 29. All had been arrested on suspicion of involvement in the killing. Officers questioned each of them extensively, cross-checking their accounts against CCTV, call data, and witness testimony. Within 24 hours, detectives confirmed all 4 had been eliminated from the inquiry. Their arrests underscored how quickly the investigation was moving, but also how little was yet known about the precise events in the dark of the park. As inquiries continued, cooperation with West Midlands Police became essential. Digital evidence, movement patterns, and intelligence began to point away from Northampton itself and towards Birmingham, where the suspects were believed to have travelled immediately after the killing. Working in tandem, the 2 forces tracked down their locations. On Friday, the breakthrough came. In the Birmingham area, officers arrested both Daniel Lahman and Kieran Okosha-Slight on suspicion of Tommy's murder. They were taken into custody and transported back for interviews and processing, marking the moment the investigation turned from speculation to certainty. The arrests did not stop with the 2 suspects. A 45-year-old woman from Northampton was also taken into custody on suspicion of assisting an offender. After the interview, she was released under investigation while inquiries continued. A separate arrest was made in Birmingham. A 21-year-old man detained on suspicion of assisting an offender and perverting the course of justice, but was later released on bail. The groundwork for prosecution was now firmly in motion, and once the arrests were made, the entire case shifted into the courtroom, where every action, each message, and every second of that night would be laid bare. After their arrests in Birmingham, Daniel Lahman and Kieran Okosha-Slight were formally charged with the murder of 30-year-old Tommy Boom. Lahman faced an additional count of possessing a bladed article. Their first appearance took place at Northampton Magistrates' Court, where both were remanded in custody and the case was sent to Northampton Crown Court. At the initial Crown Court hearing on 24th of July, Lahman appeared in person and Okosha-Slight via video link, with a plea hearing set for 19th August and a provisional trial listed for January. Defence teams began preparing a self-defence case for Lahman, led by barrister Edward Megarian, centred on his claim that he feared an imminent robbery. The trial opened before a jury of 9 women and 3 men. Prosecutors set out their case with the help of overwhelming evidence, along with those 2 videos that we have already discussed. The homeless woman present in the park testified that she and Tommy had planned to lure the dealers there to rob them, but confirmed Tommy never produced a weapon. Lahman took the stand, what we have already discussed. The defence argued he acted only to escape, but the jury rejected this interpretation. On the 23rd of January, both men were found guilty of murder. At sentencing, Lahman received life imprisonment with a minimum term of 24 years, whereas Okocha Slight received life with a minimum of 21. DCI Johnny Campbell stated that Tommy had been unarmed and killed in cold blood, highlighting the wider consequences of knife crime. Tommy's family spoke of profound loss, a daughter left without memories, parents describing the devastation of his death, and relatives warning of the dangers of carrying knives for protection. But this was only one of the killings we're looking at today. Years earlier, another violent mistake would unfold on a North London estate, and its consequences would echo just as loudly. Before his name appeared in headlines, Imani Alloway Muir was simply a young man from the Westbourne estate in Islington, known to almost everyone in the area. He had been born and raised there, moving through the same footpaths, parks and blocks that formed the daily rhythm of his community. Paradise Park was one of his favourite places, along with the football cage where he spent hours with friends. At 22, he stood out physically at around 6'2", often referred to locally as a gentle giant. People who knew him said he was handsome, soft-spoken and well-liked. Imani also devoted time to helping others. He volunteered with children who had additional needs, supporting staff and working closely with young people facing challenges similar to his own. It was a role he enjoyed, and one that gave him a sense of purpose within the local community. He had a close relationship with his parents and siblings, and the loss of his grandmother earlier that year had affected him deeply. The response from the Westbourne estate reflected just how widely he was known. But while the community gathered to honor him, detectives were beginning to piece together the events that led to the gunfire that afternoon. Events that would soon reveal a very different picture of what happened on Roman Way. Hours before the shooting on Roman Way, a separate incident unfolded that would set the entire chain of events in motion. Earlier on the 4th of July, 2020, Dimitrios Kyriakou was robbed on Carville Street in Islington. According to police and court evidence, he was approached by 4 men in a black BMW who attacked him and took several items, including his Rolex watch, his mobile phones and a quantity of cash. During the robbery, he suffered head injuries, but when officers arrived, he declined medical treatment and refused to cooperate with the investigation. Instead, he walked away from the scene and made his way back to the 6 Acres estate, where he had friends, relatives, and associates close by. What happened next was pieced together by detectives in the weeks following the shooting. Once back on the estate, Kyriakou regrouped with people within his immediate circle. Together, they began using the Find My iPhone feature to track the location of the stolen devices. The signal began moving across Islington, giving them the impression that the items, and possibly the people involved in the robbery, were still nearby. At some point that afternoon, a firearm was obtained. How it came into their possession was not detailed publicly, but it became central to what unfolded. A small convoy of vehicles was assembled, including Kyriakou's blue Range Rover. The group prepared to leave the estate, following the live location data from the stolen phones. As the tracking signal continued to move, Kyriakou and the group set off, unaware that the location they were heading toward belonged to someone completely unconnected to the robbery. And as the convoy rolled out of 6 Acres, the route it followed would lead directly to the Westbourne estate, and to a fatal mistake that no one in the community saw coming. The people travelling together included Nathaniel Rees, Dimitrios Kyriakou, Matthew Hardy, and along with others who filtered in and out of the group around that time. When the convoy reached the vicinity of Roman Way, they continued checking the tracking app. The phone signal appeared to settle near the estate's walkway and playground area. Among them was 22-year-old Imani Alloway Muir. Witnesses identified Nathaniel Rees as the man carrying the firearm. Prosecutors described the group's actions not as a search or an attempt to recover stolen goods, but as a retaliation mission. They stated plainly that the group had launched a revenge attack, arriving in the area armed and prepared to confront whoever they thought had taken Kyriaku's property. As the group reached the Westbourne estate, multiple shots were fired in rapid succession, 7 to 9 rounds in total. Reports suggested that the gunman was riding a moped or small bike at the time of shooting, and it lasted only a few seconds. Imani Alloway Muir was struck at close range. He collapsed immediately, while people nearby called emergency services. Police, ambulance crews, and the air ambulance reached Roman Way within minutes. Paramedics worked on Imani at the scene, but he was pronounced dead at around 3:49 p.m. His death was confirmed to be the result of gunshot wounds, and a post-mortem was scheduled for the following week. Roman Way and the surrounding estate were immediately cordoned off. Access points were closed, and forensic officers began documenting the scene under a heavy police presence. Imani's death made one fact clear from the outset. The person killed had no connection whatsoever to the robbery that had triggered the retaliation. In the days that followed the shooting, Imani's family spoke openly about the depth of their grief. His mother, Keitha, described being torn to pieces, unable to sleep or eat, and experiencing waves of panic and hyperventilation. She said the loss felt unbearable, not only because of its suddenness, but because of the innocence she believed to find her son. The family repeatedly returned to the scene of the shooting, trying to understand the final moments of Imani's life. Tributes grew across the estate. A large vigil was held in Paradise Park, one of Imani's favorite places, where crowds gathered for a minute's silence, prayers, and shared memories. Another shrine emerged near the shooting scene. Flowers, candles, photographs, and an Arsenal shirt marked Black Lives Matter. The display became a focal point for those wanting to pay their respects. However, after some residents raised concerns about gatherings at the site, the council moved most of the shrine to Paradise Park. The decision caused distress for the family, who said the original location held emotional significance. Despite previously holding distrust toward police, the family publicly praised the homicide officers for their compassion and support throughout the investigation. But while tributes continued to grow, detectives were closing in on those responsible, and soon, arrests across London and beyond would reshape the entire direction of the case. In the immediate aftermath of Imani's killing, there were no arrests. Detectives from the Metropolitan Police Specialist Crime Command began working through witness accounts, CCTV, communications data, and evidence recovered from the scene. The shooting, investigators concluded, was not random. It was a targeted revenge mission, but with the wrong target. As inquiries progressed, the first major breakthrough came with the arrest of 39-year-old Nathaniel Reese, identified by a witness as the gunman. He was charged with murder and with possessing a firearm with intent to endanger life. Soon after, Matthew Hardy, aged 36, was also arrested and charged with murder. The investigation widened further when armed officers travelled to Sheerness, Kent, where they arrested Dimitrios Kyriakou. He too was charged with murder. Another associate, Darren Dredge, 41, was arrested and charged, followed by further arrests, including James Nicholson and a few others linked to the group. All initial defendants appeared before Highbury Corner Magistrates Court before their cases were committed to the Old Bailey due to the seriousness of the charges. Over time, some defendants were acquitted, while others faced manslaughter convictions rather than murder, reflecting differing levels of involvement. At the Old Bailey trial, the prosecution presented their case with all possible evidence that we have discussed earlier. After weeks of hearings, the jury delivered a series of split but decisive verdicts. Nathaniel Reese was found guilty of murder, following his earlier guilty plea. Dimitrios Kyriakou was also convicted of murder for his role in orchestrating. Several other defendants, including Matthew Hardy, Darren Dredge, and James Nicholson, were convicted of manslaughter. The court formally accepted that Imani Alloway Muir was completely innocent. Sentences reflected each defendant's role. Reese received life imprisonment with a minimum term of 33 years and 2 months. Kyriakou also received life, with a minimum of 31 years, including concurrent sentences for drug and criminal property offenses uncovered during the investigation. Hardy was sentenced to 7.5 years plus 18 months concurrent for drugs offenses. Dredge received 8.5 years alongside property convictions, and Nicholson to 13 years, with an order to serve 2/3 before parole eligibility. What do you think about the cases and the sentences? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your take. And if you found this breakdown informative, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode of UK Crime Documentaries.